happen to think that the majority of people in this country are libertarian. They just don't know it.
Is that true? Are you economically conservative and socially liberal? Then you're a libertarian.
It's the first nationally televised debate.
In part one of our presidential forum, we heard these three libertarians debate.
Gay bear.
Well, I met Austin in a gay bar.
It was different from Republican and Democratic debates. Libertarians focus on getting government out of the way.
I didn't create a single job. Government doesn't create jobs. The private sector does.
But the Second Amendment was not for hunting. The Second Amendment was to shoot at tyrants if the government becomes tyrannical.
All governments will eventually become corrupt.
After all, look at the kinds of people who want power over you.
Two kind of awful people.
Two virulent statists.
These alternatives would be great.
Yes, each of these candidates is better than Donald or Hillary. We hear more from them now in part two of our Libertarian Presidential Forum.
And now, John Stossel.
Welcome back to part two of our Libertarian Presidential Forum. It's a relief to hear from libertarians after months of listening to Clinton and Trump talk about reducing our liberty. The three Libertarian presidential candidates are former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson, software entrepreneur John McAfee, Libertarian Republic founder Austin Peterson. Let's get right to it. Governor Johnson, what would you do about illegal immigration?
I would make it as easy as possible for those illegal immigrants to get a work visa as long as they haven't committed any crimes.
Agreement? Disagreement?
Yeah, our country was founded on the principle of open arms. You know, all of our ancestors were immigrants, and so why are we trying to shut our borders and keep people out? So, but they have to be documented. If I have to be documented, well then I think immigrants as well should have to be documented and made legal.
I think we can incentivize legal immigration, so that we can cut down on illegal immigration. If we make a simpler path to citizenship, then people will not break the law if they know that there's a chance that they can come here.
Simple path for the 11, 12 million illegals already here. Just let them
Yeah, they're already
legal.
here. They're already adding to our economy. So why don't we make it so that they can find a path to citizenship?
Because they lied to get in. It's an insult to the people who followed the rules.
If you were living in a third world country and your family was starving to death, who would not cross that wall? We have got to make it simple for them to come here because we have a policy of love towards immigrants. We're an immigrant nation. My last name is Peterson, spelled S-E-N. The Danish came over here through Ellis Island. We need to have a simple path to naturalization. Disease check, security check, done.
Any disagreement?
Well, the reality is that you've got Mexicans in Juarez that can see jobs that exist in El Paso, but they can't get across the border to take those jobs. So they have to cross illegally, and they are taking jobs that U.S. citizens don't want.
Americans say they're taking our jobs.
Well, that's not the case, and it's not an issue either of lower pay. It's lower pay when language is an issue, and they're the first ones that recognize this. We're getting the cream of the crop when it comes to workers from Mexico, and I am speaking as a border governor.
What about... Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. You said they lied to get in, and I'm not going to claim hypocrisy. However, who of you have not lied? Has anybody ever had an affair here? Has anybody smoked weed in a state where it's illegal and been asked by the police if you're carrying it? Come on, sir. That was an absurd statement, and I'm sorry I have to say that. All right.
Fair enough. Libertarian-ish Republican Rand Paul said we got to worry about terrorism. We should put a hold on immigration from certain parts of the world. Do you agree? Disagree?
I disagree. I think that we should be taking our fair share, and I think you phrased that question just right. Rand Paul, libertarian-ish, is about half of what he has to say. I agree with wholeheartedly. Of all the Republican candidates, he was my guy, but bottom line, he's a Republican. He's not a libertarian.
Any ban on Muslims coming in?
You can't enforce something like that. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says that the government should stay out of religion. The government cannot set those kinds of standards or quotas. What are you going to do? You're going to ask them what their religion is when they come here? That's un-American. We've got to have a simpler path to naturalization for these people because they are coming here because they want to work. When immigrants come to the United States, they don't just take jobs, they give labor. They create wealth. That's how the free market economy works, and we should encourage that. Besides, if they wanted free welfare, they would go to Europe. It's the United States. Here in the United States is the land of opportunity. It still is. So we should welcome the people who want to come here.
Let's talk about that. Mr. McAfee, you've said, as did Milton Friedman, you can't have open borders and a welfare state. So you would shut the border until you took down the welfare state, or how would you do it?
You're assuming that I'm agreeing with that statement to begin with, which I do not. I don't think open borders and welfare states have anything to do with one another. I think it's the attitude of the government toward its citizenry that creates a welfare state. But I would like to say about letting Muslims in. What are we trying to protect ourselves from? Is it not ourselves? Did we not create terrorism by interfering in the affairs of foreign nations?
I just want to say that you left out a part of Milton Friedman's statement there, because when he said that you can't have open borders in a welfare state, he said, then he followed up by saying that means that illegal immigration is actually superior. Why? Because then they don't qualify for benefits. So if we had a simpler path to naturalization, we wouldn't have the problem, but we should build a wall around the welfare state.
Next topic. Donald Trump says he supports free trade, but only fair free trade. He says our bad deals with other countries have cost Americans jobs. That leads to a question posted on Facebook from Joe Rafferty. How will free trade help the working class by way of employment, not just lower the price of goods? Mr. Johnson.
Well, free trade. Who benefits from free trade but you and I as consumers? If China wants to subsidize the goods and services that they send to the United States, who benefits? We do. And ultimately, China pays the price. Look, I think
some American workers lose jobs.
Well, I'm advocating eliminating income tax and corporate tax. And if we did that, in my opinion, along with the IRS, we would create tens of millions of jobs in this country. Because why would you locate a business anywhere in the world other than the United States, given a zero corporate tax rate?
If we have a problem with jobs and they're not enough, it has nothing to do with free trade. It has to do with the fact that our government has placed so many barriers to entry for entrepreneurs and new businesses. I mean, if the government would get out of our way, we would have more than enough jobs for people. This is the fundamental issue.
But some people lose jobs. When China subsidizes steel, some steel workers lose jobs.
But consumers benefit from lower prices. See, nobody's talking about the third party in this equation, which nobody's speaking up for, and that's the consumer. Right. When you're allowed to purchase things from overseas, you can buy things at a lower price. That lifts people out of poverty. The purchasing power. So if the Federal Reserve would stop destroying our dollars, we could buy even more.
Governor?
No, nobody's talking about entrepreneurship in all of this. Really, the model of the future is Uber. It's Uber everything. It's Uber accountant, it's Uber doctor, it's Uber electrician, it's Uber plumber. Eliminating the middleman and allowing the person who provides the goods and services direct payment for that, as opposed to having a middleman. And it's also Airbnb, that we can subsidize our own incomes. It's getting government out of the way.
This is a new approach to jobs. Presidential candidates always talk about jobs.
I will be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. I tell you that.
We need a president that can create jobs.
Create good-paying jobs.
It's what they say all the time. Governor, what would you do to create jobs?
In 2012, they did an analysis because Rick Perry was beating his chest over being the biggest creator of jobs. Well, they did an analysis, and guess what? It was Gary Johnson. And my response then was the same as when I was governor. I didn't create a single job. Government doesn't create jobs. The private sector does. But government can create this level playing field, and I do think I contributed to that.
Mr. McAfee?
I have to, for once, agree completely with Governor Johnson. Here's the issue. Jobs are created by industry, by private business, and they are reduced when we impose barriers. When we impose excessive income taxes, in order to start a business, I have to fill out 1,000 forms and report to OSHA. This is the fundamental problem. If we remove these barriers, our industry will take care of itself and our jobs will improve.
Liberty is the opposite of license. We have got to get rid of the occupational licensing in this country. Yes. Why do you need a license to braid hair? The government has got to get out of the way. The Institute for Justice has been stepping in for this. If the government would get out of the way, why do I need a certificate to cut hair? Ladies and gentlemen, this is ridiculous. Occupational licensing is one of the greatest threats to liberty and entrepreneurship that we have. We've got to get government out of the way. Governor?
And taking off on what Austin said, having been governor and vetoed as many bills as I did, I got to tell you, I vetoed a few of those.
Good. Thank you. We'll have more coming up. We thank our viewers who follow us on social media and submitted questions for the candidates. If the rest of you want to get in on this action, please follow me at Twitter at John Stossel. Use the hashtag StosselForum or like my Facebook page, then you can post your comment. On Twitter, one good question came from Daryl Perry. He says, why did you limit your debate to only 3 Libertarian candidates? That's a good question, and I'll take the rap for that. It's my decision. I thought if you have too many people, you don't learn that much about any one candidate. These 3 seem to be the right amount to me. Candidates who placed lower in the early polls, I apologize, and I just learned that Daryl W. Perry is one of those candidates, so sorry, Daryl. When we return, more on terrorism, privacy, weed, and pollution. Also, questions from skeptical Fox News hosts.
You see the what should the role of the federal government be when it comes to protecting the environment?
Welcome back to our Libertarian Presidential Forum. Recently, the government managed to break into the iPhone used by the San Bernardino terrorist. Apple had refused to help the government, and most libertarians supported Apple. So, Fox News host Eric Bolling asks this.
If an iPhone contained the exact time and date of an imminent terror attack in America, should Apple break the encryption to find out where and when that will be?
Mr. McAfee, as a computer expert, I go to you first.
I think it's an absurd concept to think that a single telephone can predict a terrorist attack. It doesn't work that way. And this is something...
What if they had intelligence that on this phone is the plan? They might have intelligence that said that.
That's never happened, sir. I mean, this is my business. We're in something I know something about. I can promise you that has never happened.
It might happen.
I debated on CNN the FBI mouthpiece who came on and said this is an issue of privacy versus security. I go, well, maybe for you, but far more important, it's an issue of more insecurity to the American public by giving a master key to telephones. So you have to believe me, there is not a situation. Do you actually think that terrorists are going to put their plan on an iPhone? When they throw their phones away every day? No, they're smarter than this, sir. The world doesn't work that way. I wish it did.
Mr. Peterson.
Right, I agree with Mr. McAfee, and I'd like to add, let's remember our Jefferson, because timid men prefer the calm of despotism to the boisterous seas of liberty. And I would much rather be exposed to the inconveniences of too much liberty than of too little.
This is always the argument, and there's no evidence that with all this metadata that's being collected, 110 million Verizon users being monitored, that there has ever been an instance of actually thwarting an act of terrorism. So this is always the question, this is always the hypothetical, but it just doesn't exist. And if we create... Look, it's one thing to open up one phone, but I'm siding with Apple that they can't just do that. They're going to have to provide a master key, and if they did that, I think it could be the immediate death sentence if the Chinese government got a hold of that when it comes to a lot of Chinese citizens.
All right. Moving on, you all support the Second Amendment, individuals' right to own a gun, but some people with criminal records, some mentally ill people get guns, some commit terrible crimes. Should there be any limit? Mr. Governor Johnson.
I think we should be open to a debate and a discussion over limiting guns to mentally ill. But I haven't heard an argument. Well, I haven't heard the argument. We should be open to that. We should be open to it. But I got to tell you that I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any argument that at some point isn't going to prevent me from getting that gun because I'm going to fail some sort of litmus test to have to do that.
Don't you think that King George would have declared the colonists to be mentally ill? It's the government that sets the standards. The government has no right to take away our form of our form of self-defense. It is an individual right to bear arms. We, the people, are the militia, and we should have every right to defend ourselves. I would overturn the National Firearms Act so fast your head would spin, because nobody should be forced to pay $200 to put a suppressor on the end of their AR-15. I built my first one last year, and I use it frequently for hunting. But the Second Amendment was not for hunting. The Second Amendment was to shoot at tyrants if the government becomes tyrannical.
If anyone doubts my position on the Second Amendment, you've never seen a single photograph of me. But I'd like to say that the Constitution gives us the right not just to own guns. It doesn't say own guns. It says to bear arms, to carry them on our person without restriction. And Austin is right. Who makes the laws? Who's going to say who is insane or who is a criminal? Someone who smokes marijuana and is sentenced to 15 years in federal prison as a felony, are they a criminal and should not be allowed a gun? We're not allowed to choose that. I'm sorry. To say that.
Can we get the governor on the record about what he thinks the government should do in terms of background checks?
On the record, Austin, on the record, I have always supported gun rights. I signed concealed carry in New Mexico. My political advocacy group has been talking about don't limit the caliber
take it easy.
of the...
Don't act so crazy, we might take your guns, Governor. Who do you think should be restricted in terms of owning guns?
I don't.
Who do you think is mentally unstable?
Somebody that is mentally unstable.
And how would you determine that?
I find
and what role does the federal government have to play?
Are you listening?
Yeah.
I find it difficult to be able to actually come up with a piece of legislation that would address that. That's what I said.
We won't solve that in this segment. When we come back, a question from Dana Perino. We're back with the three leading Libertarian presidential candidates. First, a question from host of The Five, Dana Perino.
What should the role of the federal government be when it comes to protecting the environment?
Mr. McAfee, it's something we say government should do?
I'm sorry?
Is that something government should do?
No,
Private sector can handle it?
Let me tell you why. Because if you have a truly free market, then the environment will be protected by the market support or lack of support. Why do we have electric cars now? Not because they're mandated, but simply because people prefer them, going, I'm doing something to help the environment. So how is the government going to create anything based on science, which is constantly changing and contradicting itself?
But pollution controls have made the air and the water cleaner. If I have a factory, my smoke goes to someone else's yard. I don't see how private...
You haven't been to Detroit recently if you think water is clean, sir. I'm sorry. But have they? Have they indeed? I mean, catalytic converters, they have removed the sulfides from the exhaust so that we do not have acid rain, but what have they added in terms of carcinogens into the air? A lot. I mean, it's a complex issue.
So you would have no EPA?
Pardon?
You would have no environmental protection
have no EPA.
agency.
Absolutely, sir.
Mr. Peterson?
The EPA are a bunch of unelected bureaucrats with assault rifles.
You would abolish the EPA?
Well, the president does not have the authority to abolish anything. We have to work through Congress, and you have to obey the Constitution.
Would you ask Congress to?
I would ask Congress to do so, but if they would not do it, I would ask them to relegate the EPA to their original enforcement role. The EPA was not meant to go out and harass Oregonians and murder Oregonians. The problem with the EPA is that they are originally supposed to provide scientific evidence in cases where property rights were in dispute. If the EPA is to exist, that's all they should be doing, providing scientific expertise. You know, I always say I don't believe in gun control, but I do think that we need to control the government's uses of guns. We've got to disarm the feds.
All right, but no EPA, Governor Johnson? This seems like one agency that we did need.
I think that government exists to protect us against individuals, groups, corporations that would do us harm. And there are polluters out there. In New Mexico, there was a mine that was polluting a river in northern New Mexico. It had been allowed to pollute for decades. My biggest ace in the hole was I was going to make them a Superfund site if, in fact, they didn't come to the table because they were bad actors. If it weren't for federal EPA shutting them down, they would still be polluting that river. I put this in the context of protecting us against harm.
What about global warming? Should they protect us from that?
Whether global warming is true or not, government should play no role. It's not the job of the government to protect us from these things. The government is actually the biggest polluter. Did you know? So let's get the government out of the business of polluting. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is a scientific consensus that states that there is a warming trend. But the truth is that there may actually be some benefits to the warming trend. Scientists are good at looking at the facts on the ground, but they're terrible at predictions. They're not Nostradamus, and we shouldn't be making those kinds of policy decisions and beating people over the head to solve a problem. China won't come to the table, by the way. They're a big polluter. India, they're greater polluters than the United States. So what is the federal government going to do to force China and India to come to the table? That's the question. Why do we have to crack down on the Americans? Why is it always we have to tax Americans? That's the problem, is that we are not even the biggest polluter, so it's hypocritical of the government to try and enact these legislation on us.
McAfee.
10,000 years ago, where we're sitting now was under a mile of ice. That ice occurred over a 100-year period and disappeared just as rapidly. Our Earth has gone through unimaginable cycles and changes. I'm not saying that what we're doing is not increasing global warming, but we can't stop the warming and cooling cycle that the Earth does as its spin wobbles around its axis. I'm sorry.
So if you had the power, you would approve the Keystone Pipeline?
But what power should we have to approve or disapprove anything of that nature? That's the issue I'm asking. I mean, because you're assuming that we are gods as the government, that we have elected the smartest people and the smartest scientists. Well, we haven't, and we can't, because we cannot know that. So, no, we should not have that power, sir.
So private pipeline companies would build those things, and should they have the right of eminent domain to lay the pipe?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Well, that's the other thing that no one should have the right to do. To take away my property or to cross my property without my permission? Absolutely not, sir. So, no, therein lies the issue.
How would they get the right-of-way?
Maybe they won't, and then maybe that's a good thing. They don't have their pipeline. I don't know. Let the market do its own thing, sir.
Governor?
Well, 8 years as governor of New Mexico, not once did I enact eminent domain for anything. The Keystone Pipeline, I support the Keystone Pipeline, but I don't know how much of that relies on eminent domain. And I'd be hard-pressed to condemn property to see that take place. With regard to global warming, I think a great example right now is free markets and the fact that we don't want carbon pollution. So the free market has basically bankrupted coal in this country, and it's a decision that you and I have made. We don't want carbon emission. We want less of it. And a great example, like I say, right now it's playing itself out. No more coal plants are being built.
Next, gambling and prostitution and drinking and more from pushy Fox anchors.
So here's my question for the libertarian geniuses.
This is what we have to deal with here at Fox. He's got a question about drugs after the break. Welcome back to our Libertarian presidential debate. Most libertarians say the drug war does much more harm than good, and that adults ought to be allowed to do to our own bodies whatever we want. And that leads many other Americans to say things like this.
So here's my question for the libertarian geniuses. You see the damage that heroin is doing all over the United States. You see it because it's cheap. And the cartels in Mexico are smuggling it here with very, very little interference. Imagine if heroin and other hard drugs were legalized here and distributed here, how much damage would occur. So how can you support that?
Mr. McAfee.
Okay. I don't know how many of you were alive in the 50s, but you could buy opium in the form of paregoric off the shelf at any pharmacy in this country. There was no opium epidemic because it was available legally. Absolutely not. Common sense. You know, if you're going and buying paregoric and your parents found out, you'd get a whipping, which is what they used to do in the 50s. Okay, so by saying we're going to legalize drugs, we're going to increase the consumption, absolutely not. The reverse usually happens. Why? Because children always want to do something which is a little bit bad, something that's exciting. If it's legal and you see people buying it and you have heroin addicts on the street, what is the damage that they're doing to society? That's my question. The damage they're doing is to themselves. And the damage that we do is assuming that we know what's right for you. You're going to be a better person if you stop doing heroin.
Sir Peters.
Yeah, I have to say that Bill O'Reilly's being a pinhead on this one. Sorry, Bill. You know, because drugs are illegal, that they are so dangerous. We saw this with Prohibition when they were making bathtub gin. If you knew what kind of dosages you were taking when it came to illegal drugs, you might know what the danger is. Drug dealers, thank you. Drug dealers don't check IDs. We've spent $1 trillion on a no-win war on drugs. One of Nixon's aides just came out recently and said that the war on drugs was meant to crack down on hippies and black people. It's ridiculous. We've got to stop this. This is where we get the violence on the border. If you guys want to have a more secure border, then you've got to end the war on drugs. We will be a safer, freer nation.
Governor Johnson.
We've got an example out there with Zurich, Switzerland, where they made free heroin available. You had to register, but you got as much heroin as you wanted. The idea was to reduce death, disease, crime, and corruption. I met with the chief of police from Zurich, Switzerland, when he came to Albuquerque for a worldwide drug conference in 2002, and he said, when they came out with this program in Zurich, I and all of law enforcement could not have been more opposed to this. Death, disease, crime, and corruption was going to skyrocket. I'm here to tell you that all of those things improved, and the citizens of Zurich re-upped on this program. When you realize that only 8,000 people a year die from heroin overdose, and people say, well, that's because it's illegal. Well, gee whiz, if it were legal, if it were controlled, meaning quality, quantity known, you might not have any death. But people will still commit suicide doing anything.
All right, some people will get addicted, so Geraldo Rivera has a related question.
When covering the New Hampshire political primaries, the presidential primaries this year, we found an epidemic of heroin abuse and overdose deaths like I had never seen before. As a Libertarian candidate, would you be in favor of government programs to help the addicts, and stem this epidemic of overdose deaths?
Mr. McAfee, government programs?
Well, here's the problem. We're assuming that you can actually help a heroin addict that does not want to be helped. I mean, as a former addict and alcoholic, I can promise you that until you hit bottom and you're ready to reach up for help, there's nothing anybody can do. Because if I want my heroin fixed, all of the goodwill in the world is nothing more than the interference of you into my life. Because you view me as something alien and improper. I'm the heroin addict, and therefore I need to be fixed. You can't do it. I've got to want to be fixed, and I've got to reach out to you first. You can't reach out to this. You cannot.
Lightning round. Moving on. Should we legalize prostitution, sex work? Governor Johnson, yes or no?
Well, it's more than a yes and no. Look, if you're going to engage in prostitution, where is the safest place in the world that you can do that? Well, it's Nevada. And so, yes, empower women, protect women from the abuses that occur with prostitution.
My wife was forced into prostitution at the age of 20, and for 10 years suffered unimaginable hardships and physical abuse, mental abuse for 10 years under a vicious pimp. I personally rescued her 3.5 years ago and married her. And so my opinion is it has to be legalized, else it is the most inhuman of all things as being criminalized.
Should gambling, quick answers, should gambling be legal?
Absolutely.
Yes, all for them?
Best example of crony capitalism. The licenses that get issued have to do with being inside.
Yes. Correct.
When we return, a question from Judge Napolitano. We're back with our Libertarian Presidential Forum. Here's a question for you from senior judicial analyst Judge Napolitano.
What would you do to protect the Constitution today in an era in which no one alive has consented to it, and the president regularly violates it, and the Congress treats it like a blank check?
Mr. Peterson.
Well, the question is, what did the founders mean when they meant they were leaving something to their posterity? The Constitution was a gift to us. They fought hard to restrict the power of government.
He's asking, how would you protect it?
Well, how would I protect it? By obeying it, by understanding it, by reading it, which I do every single day. The president has a responsibility to obey the law. The government is set between checks and balances. And we have to remind people that the president doesn't write the law. That's the Congress's job. So I would protect the Constitution by obeying it.
The founding fathers were smart enough to know that all governments will eventually become corrupt. This is what happens. As you gain more power, you gain more corruption. This is the facts of life. Embedded within the Constitution is the fail-safe, the Constitutional Convention, which can be convened by Congress or by two-thirds majority of the states, which we're already close to. So they anticipated that we would at some point need something else and gave us the option to do so through the Constitutional Convention. They were smart people. And we have reached that point. If anyone thinks our government is not insane, has not turned inward, has not invaded your privacy, and is not serving you, and instead they are becoming your mother and your father to order you around, this is the reverse role.
Governor Johnson.
Governments invade our privacy, but do not let us invade its privacy. This is the problem. So the Constitution has the means to save itself. So.
Governor Johnson.
Well, we should obey the Constitution, but we should recognize that we can change it. If there's one thing I would change about the Constitution, it's the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, which allows the direct election of U.S. senators as opposed to senators being appointed by the states. If that were the case, we would not have the biggest problem facing this country today, which is government spending.
And the 16th Amendment, income tax, sorry.
And I'm advocating for the same, yes, with regard to eliminating the income tax. Yeah.
All right. Closing statement time. Each candidate gets 45 seconds. We begin with Austin Peters.
My fellow Americans, you and I have a rendezvous with destiny. This year we must decide if we are going to nominate a candidate who represents the future of our movement, or if we are content with stagnation. Now, I might just seem like an energetic youth, but in 1 Timothy it says, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for believers in speech, conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. I believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all individuals, regardless of age, race, faith, non-faith, or sexuality. We're all made of the same star stuff, people, and we're all endowed with the same individual rights. May the light of liberty shine on all of humanity forever, and especially on my beloved United States of America.
Mr. McAfee.
In my opening statement, I said I hope that through this debate you would see the value of liberty in all things. And I hope that in the 2 hours that we have been debating and answering these sometimes very difficult questions, you have seen that some fundamental principles are all that we need to live together in a sane and harmonious fashion. We cannot hit one another. We cannot take each other's stuff. We must keep our word, our agreements, and our contracts. And that personal privacy and personal freedom are paramount to any society in which I would want to live, and you, I hope.
Governor Johnson.
If you want someone who will tirelessly advocate for smaller government, less taxes, more individual freedom and liberty, free markets, embracing immigration as really a good thing, a skeptic when it comes to our military interventions, term limits, ending the drug war, crony capitalism, women's equality, I'm your guy. I will relentlessly pursue all of these things with common sense that all of you will be proud of.
Thank you, candidates. Good luck to you all. They now go back to the campaign trail. The Libertarian Convention will be held next month in Orlando. At that time, the party will pick its nominee. I assume it's one of these three. We hope this debate helped you decide who you would choose. And when we return, analysis from Reason Magazine's Matt Welch and Fox Business host Kennedy. Thank you. We've now heard almost 2 hours of debate from the Libertarian presidential candidates. Who made the best case? Let's ask two smart libertarians, Reason Magazine editor Matt Welch, Fox Business host Kennedy. Kennedy, you first.
I thought Austin made a good point that if you end the war on drugs, you'll actually make the border much more secure.
Austin stuck the landing, I thought, really well right at the very end after making sweet love to the Constitution for a long time in the founding generation.
My fellow Americans.
1802. But talking about the importance of ballot access into making the Libertarian Party a lasting, I mean, it already is the biggest third party by far in this country. It is the only third party going right now. I don't want to disrespect the Green Party, but it's doing, it's doing pretty well right now.
It's okay to do that.
But he made a good point with ballot access. I thought it was very interesting to note the different ways that they agreed with each other. Right, many of the agreements.
But before you go to that, it sounds like you're saying, oh, you think Austin Peterson won the debate?
I'm not going to say that Austin.
No,
Peterson
I don't
won
think
the
Austin Peterson won the debate by a long shot.
Did anybody win? Somebody best?
I thought Gary Johnson made the best practical case to a curious mainstream audience, especially when he talked about entrepreneurship.
Gary, God love him, he still is a little bit tentative about believing what he believes. So it's like, legalize prostitution, yes or no? Well, it's complicated, blah, 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 blah.
It's so safe and fun.
Probably yes.
Yeah.
Whereas John McAfee, and this goes to their difference, Gary Johnson is very pragmatically kind of oriented. How far can we push this? John McAfee is like, you own your life, man. And no, but that's I'm from California. I think that's cool. He's actually making things into first principles, and he turned one of your audience members just for that, coming out of the gate talking about you own yourself. It is fundamental to the conception of freedom and just citizenship that you own your own body. So there's a pragmatic case to be made for libertarianism, but there's also a deep philosophical case, and I think McAfee makes that case.
I also thought that he scored points on prostitution, saying that when you criminalize prostitution, you're actually creating a much more inhumane state.
So Gary kind of hems and haws on...
and gives details. Like, he doesn't just meet the guy from Zurich. He meets him in New Mexico. Who cares? In 2012. Who cares?
But at the same time, Austin and McAfee, I think, were a bit rigid when they talked about environmental regulation. I think you were pointing out...
we're going to live without an EPA?
I mean, we probably could live without an EPA, John. Now. However, if you're going to make a short list of what's going to survive the libertarian bloodbath, EPA would be on that list, because you have a property rights problem with pollution. Who owns the air? Yeah. Who owns the water? You got to sort that out somehow.
Who owns the federal land?
I would be so happy if this viewpoint was out on the debate in the main stage, because on whether it's...
What? This isn't the main stage?
This is a main stage, John, but a mainer stage on things like illegal immigration, the drug war, foreign intervention, government spending, shutting things down, all of that. There is no viewpoint like this, and there won't be a viewpoint anything like this on the main stage. And we forget, we think in terms of 2 seconds in American political commentary here. Pretty soon, we're going to have 8 consecutive months of nothing but these 2 kind of awful people. And people are going to be desperate to have any kind of alternative. These alternatives would be great.
Yeah, no, you have two virulent statists. I mean, you have two, if we're talking about Hillary and Trump, you know, you have two people who are so invested in authoritarianism and creating more government to make themselves more powerful. It's kind of terrifying. I actually thought McAfee made a really good point when he was talking about Apple and how you can create more insecurity for the public when you grasp at the security through government coercion.
And again, that is a point that is the exact opposite of what Hillary and Donald Trump say. They're inseparable. They want the government on that phone. They want to shut down parts of the internet, both of them, not just Trump, over that. These guys wouldn't go anywhere near that kind of thing.
Thank you, Matt Welch. Kennedy, that's it for the first ever televised libertarian debate, nationally televised. Hope you learned something useful. Thank you for joining us. Good night.